This video discusses child abuse and neglect. Viewer discretion advised. A judge isn't supposed to cry. Judges are trained to keep their voice steady when the rest of us can't. They read the law, weigh the evidence, and speak for a system that has to stand as firm as a stone wall. But on May 6, 2025, in an Ogden, Utah courtroom, something broke through that wall. As the facts of a 12-year-old boy's life and death were read aloud, Judge Camille Neider's voice caught. She paused. She wiped away tears. And then she looked at the defendant, the father, and said words no parent ever wants to hear. "Father, you don't deserve that title anymore. Before we go any further, I'm asking for your help. If stories like this help people spot danger sooner, tap like so the algorithm doesn't bury it. And tell me your city and the time you're watching." It shows where people are ready to protect kids. The boy's name was Gavin Peterson, 12 years old, West Haven, Utah. He should have been worrying about math homework and weekend plans. Instead, prosecutors said he'd been pushed into a private world of isolation, deprivation, and silence. In July of 2024, first responders were called to a home on a report of a child who had fallen in the tub. When they arrived, what they found didn't match the script they were given. Later, doctors would describe a body in crisis systems shutting down after prolonged neglect. The medical language is clinical. The reality is not. A child's body cannot endure what the adults around him allow. As investigators worked the scene and the timeline, details began to line up like mile markers on a road no one wanted to travel. There was a delay before 911. There were calls between adults when minutes mattered. Inside the home, cameras had once watched the hallways. Now they were gone. A lock on a door had been reversed, not to keep danger out, but to keep a child in. Phones were examined. Messages were pulled. You can learn a lot from what people photograph and what they don't. There were images of one child in the home, smiling and present. There were almost none of Gavin. Detectives mapped the rooms. They listened. They compared statements against timestamps and data. The story that households often tell: "We're just strict. He's just clumsy. It's been a hard season. Wasn't holding up." There is a difference between discipline and erasure. There is a difference between parenting and control. And when people with power over a child start treating that child as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved, the results can be catastrophic. Let's talk about the people in that courtroom. On one side, the father, Shane Jesse Peterson. Across the aisle, the stepmother, Nicole Lee Scott. Another name you'll hear is Tyler Peterson, an older brother whose case took a different legal path. And in the center seat, the one that carries both the law and the weight of the community, sat Judge Camille L. Neider of Utah's 2nd District Court. By the time sentencing arrived, the plea deals and the charging documents had stripped away any room for euphemism. The father admitted guilt, child abuse, homicide, aggravated child abuse, and endangerment. The stepmother admitted to murder and multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The details prosecutors described were stark: isolation from normal life, deprivation of basic needs, and a steady, deliberate narrowing of a child's world until it was barely a world at all. This wasn't a single bad night. This was a pattern. Inside the courtroom, you could feel the air change when the judge began to speak. Reporters described a silence that didn't feel like quiet. It felt like respect for the boy whose name was on everyone's lips. Judges hear awful things every week. They manage it with distance. But distance collapsed that afternoon. As she read from a doctor's report, Judge Neider's voice trembled. "It's telling," she said, "that she felt more emotion than the man being sentenced for his own son's death." Then she addressed him directly. "Father, you don't deserve that title anymore." She ordered consecutive terms time that stacks instead of running together. At least 8 years, up to life, in a system where parole boards, not promises, decide when doors open. Why did this case break through? Because it wasn't just the brutality. It was the planning. It was the cameras that once watched and then vanished. It was the door hardware flipped around so privacy became confinement. It was the digital footprint of adults who documented so much of their lives, but not the child who needed them most. When a kid disappears from family photos, from school, from neighbors' memory, that absence is a siren we cannot ignore. People always ask, where were the helpers? Sometimes helpers were there and couldn't see enough to act. Sometimes they saw pieces and didn't know how the pieces fit. Sometimes they were lied to. Sometimes they were deceived by a performance. And sometimes, bluntly, systems miss what they should catch. That is not an excuse. It is a warning. If your gut says something is wrong, document, escalate, and keep going until someone with the authority to act actually acts. Let me paint the last days we can reconstruct. A house where a child's room was stripped of comfort. A hallway that no longer had cameras, but once did. A door that locked the wrong direction. Adults who controlled food, controlled movement, controlled contact with the outside world. And then a crisis framed as an accident. A fall. A call. A ride to the hospital. The clinical note that reads like a final verdict. A body failing because the adults in charge had already failed him. Back in court, the judge's words carried more than anger. They carried clarity. Titles, mother, father, are not shields. They are responsibilities. The law recognizes that. And so, when the father stood to be sentenced, consecutive time was the answer the court gave. Not because time can balance a life, but because in cases like this, time is the only currency the system has. For the stepmother, a different hearing, a different day, but the same gravity. She admitted to murder and to a series of acts that prosecutors said dehumanized a child over months and years. The judge called her the architect of Gavin's destruction. Think about that phrase. Not an opportunist, not a passenger, an architect, someone who plans, someone who draws lines and says, this is where the walls go. In a decent world, you build walls to shelter a child. In this case, walls were built to hide him. There's a reason reporters focused on the judge's tears. The law is supposed to be calm, but sometimes we need to see that even the calmest voice can break when it faces the truth. The tears were not the point. The child was. The tears were a message to a community. Feel this, and let that feeling change what you will do next time a child's world starts to shrink. If you're a teacher, a neighbor, a coach, a clerk at a store who sees a family every week, here is what you watch for. You watch for the kid who used to wave and now stares at the ground. You watch for the one who used to be at school and now is being homeschooled with no proof of learning and no regular check-ins. You watch for the house that used to have a front yard full of toys and now the blinds are always closed. You watch for a family that takes pictures of everything except one child. And when you see it, you don't brush it off as someone else's business. You document. You call. You keep calling. In most places, there are hotlines that will take your report, even if you're not sure. You don't have to be sure. You have to be brave. Back to our courtroom. The father stands hearing the words, up to life. The stepmother hears, 20 to life. Another defendant's case is handled with mental health supervision and reviews that will continue for years. The legal outcomes differ, but the message is the same. Our community will not pretend this was a misunderstanding. The evidence was too consistent, too deliberate, too controlled. Throughout this video, we're going to avoid graphic details. You don't need them to grasp the scale of harm. We will focus on facts that matter for prevention. We'll walk the timeline, the missed signals, the investigative steps that turned suspicion into certainty. We'll show you what the judge read that day, why it mattered, and what can change in your city so another kid doesn't slip through the cracks we all pretend we don't see. For the next few minutes, I want to sit with one idea: the difference between hardship and harm. Families go through hardship all the time. Job loss, illness, grief. Hardship looks messy but open. You'll see people asking for help, welcoming eyes on their situation, accepting groceries from neighbors, taking calls from schools. Harm looks neat at first. Curtains closed, stories rehearsed, explanations ready, cameras turned off, locks turned around. Harm is organized. Harm hates daylight. That is why daylight is exactly what these cases need. On the day of sentencing, the judge's voice did something rare. It carried both the law and the lament. The law said, consecutive time. The lament said, we failed a boy before the court ever saw him. Both can be true, and both can push us to do better. It starts with noticing. It continues with reporting. It ends, if we are lucky, with intervention before a courtroom is ever needed. If this is the first time you're hearing Gavin's name, let it be the last time a child in your orbit goes unnoticed. Save your local child protection hotline in your phone. If you're in the United States, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available 24/7. If you're elsewhere, your country has equivalents. Look them up and keep them. Don't guess. Be ready. Thank you for staying with me through this first section. More than views, more than comments, I want this to matter in the real world. Tap like so it reaches the people who need it, and drop your city and viewing time in the comments so we can see where this community is paying attention. Now let's walk, carefully and clearly, through the timeline and the evidence that brought a courtroom to tears and brought justice. However incomplete, a little closer to a boy who deserved far better. When the call to 911 finally went out, the story was simple. A child had slipped in the tub. Paramedics have heard that story 1,000 times. They still ran. They still fought for minutes. But very quickly, trained eyes began to notice what didn't fit. A slip in the tub leaves a moment, not months. It leaves chaos in one room, not patterns through a house. It does not explain a body losing the slow battle that begins when food is rationed, when sleep is controlled, when a child's world is turned into a set of rules with no exits. A timeline matters. In cases like this, it always does. There was a window before the call, a margin, where adults spoke to each other as if time could be bargained with. Those minutes became evidence. Investigators compared phone records with statements, messages with movements. They found decisions made when urgency was needed. Hesitation where any parent's instinct would be to scream for help and keep screaming until the sirens arrived. Inside the home, the environment told its own version of the truth. A lock reversed so it worked from the outside. Not privacy for a child, but control over a child. Cameras that had once watched the hallway, now removed. A bedroom stripped of softness, as if comfort itself had been declared contraband. You can tell what a house values by what it displays. In this house, the most vulnerable person was treated like something to hide. Detectives looked for ordinary evidence and for the negative space, what should have been there and wasn't. Phones full of family life, yet almost no photos of Gavin. Group shots where he was absent. Milestones for others, silence for him. And then the tone of messages between adults. When a child is called a problem long enough, some people start to believe the label instead of the person. The law calls that state of mind depraved indifference. Families sometimes call it being strict, but strict is predictable and safe. Depraved is secretive and cruel. The difference is the difference between a rule that guides and a rule that cages. Doctors, later assembled the medical picture with a kind of compassion only experience can teach. They avoided charged language and stuck to function. Systems overwhelmed, organs failing, a body showing the markers of prolonged deprivation. None of that is a single accident. None of that is a bad morning. It is a map of what happens when people with power treat care as a performance rather than a duty. From there, the investigation widened and deepened. Detectives traced purchases, looked for food patterns, asked teachers and neighbors when they had last seen the boy. Some couldn't remember. Some had a memory from months back, then nothing. Isolation wins by inches. It does not announce itself. It quietly cancels playdates, shifts to homeschooling without accountability, stops waving at the neighbors. And because it is quiet, too many of us ignore it. The father's phone became a small courtroom of its own. In messages and monitored calls, the tone mattered. Remorse looks like ownership. It sounds like, "This is what I did," not, "This is what happened." Prosecutors listened for the difference. They heard a man who could summon a performance when he needed one, and who withered when confronted with details. That contrast went into the file. Juries and judges do not sentence on vibes. They sentence on evidence. But evidence has a voice, and in this case, that voice was steady and damning dot by the time the plea was entered. The choices were on the record. The father admitted to child abuse homicide, aggravated child abuse, and endangerment. Consecutive time was the state's ask, because the law recognizes that harm done piece by piece deserves sentences that stack piece by piece. The stepmother admitted to murder and multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The judge called her the architect of the boy's destruction. Not a word thrown for drama, but a precise one. An architect studies the load a structure must bear and decides where to put the beams. In this home, the beams supported control, not care. People ask whether the older brother's case undercuts the narrative. It does not. The court carved out a lane for mental health review and supervision because the law has to see individuals clearly, even inside a family system. Injustice is treating everyone the same when they are not. Justice is hard and slow and specific. The judge's rulings reflected that. Let's return to the sentencing that shook the room. The judge had read the physician's report. She had read the officer's narrative. She had read the messages that shrank a child to an inconvenience. She had seen the door. She had seen the photographs that weren't there. Judges keep distance to keep order. But sometimes the weight of a case pushes through the distance. Her voice shook, then steadied, and she spoke for all the people who had stood in emergency rooms. For detectives who had knocked on doors that wouldn't open. For teachers who had written emails into a void. Father, you don't deserve that title anymore. Consecutive terms. At least 8 years. Up to life. For the stepmother, 20 to life. For the rest of us, a reminder. We cannot wait for a courtroom to do the seeing we refuse to do when it mattered most. What are the lessons the rest of us can carry? First, patterns beat one-offs. A bruise, a late assignment, a missed day each can have an innocent explanation. But when you see the same child absent from photos, absent from school, absent from the easy cheer of a neighborhood, the pattern is speaking. Second, language is a clue. When adults describe a child as always lying, always manipulating, always at fault, always the reason everyone else is miserable, you are hearing a script that hides abuse. Third, architecture tells the truth. Reversed locks, empty rooms, cameras that watch until they don't, those are design choices. They are not parenting. If you work in a school, set a rhythm of check-ins that can't be sidestepped by a note. If you lead a team, learn to ask after families without making it performative. If you're a neighbor, know the names, not just the house numbers. If you're a relative and your gut tells you something is wrong, Do not settle for the comfort of not knowing. Ask to FaceTime the child. Ask for a photo from today. Offer to take them out and see what the reaction is. When someone is building walls, your job is to find the door. Back in the courtroom, after the words were spoken and the sentences entered, a quiet settled that wasn't relief. It was grief and a kind of exhausted gratitude that at least the record would show what had been done. The record matters. The record is how we honor the child who didn't get a chance to tell his own story. It is also how we teach the next case, because there will be a next case unless we change the inputs that produce them. This is where I look straight at the camera and say what I wish someone had said to every adult who had a chance to interrupt this. If a child's world begins to shrink, your world needs to expand to meet theirs. Not later. Not when you have more time. Now. Save the Child Protection Hotline for your country in your phone. In the United States, the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available 24/7. If you're watching from somewhere else, your country has equivalents. Look them up. Put the numbers in your contacts with a name you will remember in a panic. The right number, ready at the right time, can be the difference between a suspicion and a saved life. I know some of you are asking, how do we keep balance? We don't want witch hunts. We don't want to criminalize poverty or punish families for being imperfect. You're right. Compassion has to be scienced up with good process. That means documenting before accusing. It means dates, times, what you saw and heard, not rumors. It means trusting professionals to investigate and being willing to be contacted again and again if they need more. It means assuming the best while preparing for the worst, because children cannot wait for our certainty. For those who say this is a private matter, consider the reversal. If a child were trapped in a burning house, would you wait for an invitation? Abuse is a slow fire. It eats oxygen and light and the will to ask for help. People who survive it often say the same thing. The hardest part was realizing that no one was coming. Be the person who comes. As for this case, the legal chapters will continue. Appeals may be filed. Reviews will happen. People will argue over words like intent and capacity and rehabilitation. That is the law doing what the law must do. But outside the courthouse, there is a different kind of work that belongs to all of us. It is not dramatic. It will not trend. It looks like showing up, checking in, noticing who is missing, and refusing to let silence be the final answer. I want to leave you with one image to carry. It is not from the worst day. It is from what should have been an ordinary day, a school pickup, a practice, a joke at the dinner table, a bedtime story. Those routine moments are the scaffolding of a child's life. When adults dismantle that scaffolding, a child falls. When communities build it back teacher by teacher, neighbor by neighbor, friend by friend, children rise. If this story moved you, let it move you to action. Tap like so it reaches someone who needs it. Leave your city and viewing time in the comments so we can see this network of care light up across the map. Share this with one person who works with kids. And if you're in a position of authority, an administrator, a policymaker, a supervisor, look again at the protocols that failed here and make them stronger where you are. A judge cried in a courtroom, and for a few seconds the system showed us its heart. The rest of the time, it shows us its rules. We need both. We need the heart that breaks when a child is broken. We need the rules that keep another child from breaking. And we need people like you, watching now, to carry both into the places where law cannot go, into living rooms and backyards in school, hallways and grocery store lines, into the quiet gaps where either harm hides or help arrives. Stay with me. In the next segment, we will carefully walk the earlier warning signs, what teachers noticed, what neighbors said, what investigators documented, and how those signals can become interventions before it's too late. The earliest warning signs are almost always the smallest. A late arrival that used to be rare and becomes routine. A child who once looked you in the eye and now glances past you, as if connection itself has become dangerous. A teacher writes a note. A neighbor wonders why the blinds never open. A relative senses a chill in a phone call and cannot name the source. Individually, each sign feels explainable. Together, they form the outline of a reality most people would rather not draw. It is easier to believe a tidy story than to face a messy truth. But children live and die in the space between those two choices. In the months before the crisis call, the pattern hardened. Adults controlled the narrative, then controlled access, then controlled the environment itself. When a door lock is flipped so that a child can be kept in, the architecture is not neutral. It speaks. When hallway cameras exist and then disappear, that disappearance is a choice. When photographs tell a family's story but somehow erase one child from the story, that erasure has meaning. The law listens to meaning. It listens to changes in routine, to missing records, to silences that arrive right where love should be. After the emergency, detectives did what they always do. They slowed time down. They marked the minutes that were spent calling each other instead of calling for help. They matched statements to timestamps, messages to movement, claims to the cold reality of medical data. They spoke to people who had crossed paths with the family. A clerk, a neighbor, a teacher, a friend. Each person carried one small piece. Together, those pieces made a picture no single witness could see alone. The hospital records were careful, clinical, human. They avoided the drama that true crime culture feeds on and replaced it with the precision that medicine demands. A system undernourished does not fail all at once. It hangs on. It adapts. It signals. Then, finally, it cannot compensate. By the time Gavin reached that threshold, the margin for miracles was gone. Doctors fought for him anyway. They always do. But medicine can only fight the present. It cannot rewrite the months that made the present inevitable. When prosecutors filed their case, they wrote in the language of law, not outrage. Aggravated child abuse, endangerment, child abuse homicide. Each term has elements that must be proved, intent, knowledge, actions that rise beyond neglect into cruelty. The evidence matched those elements: locks, cameras, food, isolation, messages, a timeline with gaps where urgency should have been, a digital record that remembered everything except the child, who most needed to be remembered. The courtroom is where the private becomes public. It is where the story that was hidden in one house becomes a record that belongs to all of us. On sentencing day, Judge Camille Neider addressed the father first. She had read the physician's narrative. She had seen the photographs that weren't there. She had felt the weight of a boy's life reduced to exhibits and pages. Her voice shifted as she spoke. She said it was telling that she was more affected than the man being sentenced for his son's death. Then she said the sentence that traveled beyond the walls of that room. "Father, you do not deserve that title anymore. Consecutive time." The words sound technical, but they carry an important truth. When harm is done layer by layer, day after day, the law can answer with time that stacks, count upon count, so that each act is acknowledged, not washed together in a single span. The number is not the point. No number can balance a life. The point is the message. This was not an accident. This was not a moment. This was a design. On a later day, the stepmother stood to hear her sentence after pleading guilty to murder and multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The judge described her as the architect of Gavin's destruction. Architect. It is a word of plans and dimensions, of choices drawn in ink before they are built in wood and steel. In most families, The architecture of a child's life includes encouragement and boundaries and ordinary joy. Here, architecture was used to limit, to silence, to control. It is right to name that clearly. The older brother's case followed a different route, one that recognized mental illness and allowed for supervision and review rather than the same kind of sentence. Justice does not flatten people into a single category because they share a last name. It looks at their actions, their capacity, their intent, and it draws lines that reflect reality. That is not softness. That is accuracy. And accuracy is the backbone of Justice. In the days after sentencing, the question echoed, how did this happen without someone stopping it? The honest answer is simple and hard. Many someones did something. A teacher asked a question. A neighbor paid attention. A relative worried. But in cases like this, the people who do the harm are often skilled at controlling information and access. They learn what to say. They practice what to show. They flip the story so that the child appears to be the problem, the liar, the manipulator, the one who must be contained for everyone else's sake. When that script takes hold, it can blind even good people. That is why patterns matter. The single bruise could be a tumble from a bike. The single late day could be a missed alarm. A single withdrawn week could be a shy season. Patterns are different. Patterns tell the truth we don't want. A child who disappears from photos, from parties, from school, from simple kindness. This is not a phase. This is a system doing what it was designed to do. Isolate. If you see it, refuse to be fooled by the script. Scripts are for plays. Children are not props. If you want to know how to help in time, make a plan before you need it. Save the child protection hotline for your country in your phone under a name you will remember. Learn the basic questions you will be asked. Who, what, when, where, what you saw or heard yourself. You do not need to be certain. You need to be accurate and willing. If you are a teacher, make sure your absence tracking means something more than a number on a screen. If you are a healthcare worker, trust the feeling that tells you a story is not adding up and ask for a second set of eyes. If you are a neighbor, know the names of the kids who ride their scooters past your driveway. Names create accountability that strangers cannot erase. People sometimes say they are afraid to get it wrong. That fear is normal. But getting it wrong by calling leads to a conversation. Getting it wrong by staying silent leads to a funeral. If you need a rule, use this one. When in doubt, document and report. Let professionals decide what is true. Your job is to make sure the concern reaches them. Don't think again about the moment the judge cried. It matters precisely because judges rarely do. A courtroom is built to be dry ground in a flood. It needs rules, not raw nerves. And yet, nerves have their place. A community needs to know that the people who wield the law are not immune to the human cost behind the charges and counts. Tears are not a sentence. They are a signal. They say to the child who was failed and to all the children watching, that what happened to you is not normal, not inevitable, not something the grown-ups will shrug away. This is the part where a video like this usually asks for change, without saying what change looks like. We will be specific. Schools can implement welfare checks that require visual confirmation of a child after repeated, unexplained absences. Courts can order random wellness visits in households with certain risk factors when cases close. Legislatures can ensure that home education claims cannot terminate a child's connection to mandated reporters without periodic, documented review. Social services can invest in training that focuses on the negative space, what is missing, not only what is present. Police can preserve and read digital life with the same seriousness that they give to fingerprints and DNA, because in many modern cases, the phone is the crime scene. Communities can create the most old-fashioned solution of all, social proximity, block parties, parent phone trees, coaches who write one message to each family at the start of a season and ask for a video. Check in if a player suddenly disappears. A community that knows itself is harder to fool. You might be thinking, this is too much. I have my own kids, my own job, my own griefs. You do. And the people who turn households into prisons count on that. They count on the world being too busy to look closely. You do not have to be a superhero. You have to be one adult who does one thing at the moment it's needed. A call, a question, a note that says, I haven't seen Gavin in a while. Could we schedule a quick check-in? In the court record, there is no space for what could have been. There is only what was. But we can spend a minute honoring the life that should have unfolded. 12 years old is the threshold to everything. Soccer practices that are more sprint than stumble. A first crush. A science fair project that does not work at all until it does. A laugh that no longer sounds like a little kid, and not yet like a grown man. The ordinary arc of an ordinary boy. That is what was stolen, and we should say it clearly. A life is not only its last day. It is every day it was supposed to have. Justice in this case means that the adults who did the harm face consequences measured in years. Justice will also mean that people who never met Gavin change the way they live in small, durable ways. The next time a child's world begins to shrink, someone watching this will notice sooner. Someone will call. Someone will insist on seeing the child with their own eyes. Someone will not be soothed by a script that explains everything and reveals nothing. That is how memory becomes protection. If you have stayed with me this long, you are already part of that work. I know videos ask for clicks and comments. I am asking for something slightly different. Tap like so this reaches the teacher who needs one more nudge to make that call. Leave your city and the time you're watching so we can see the map of people who refuse to look away. Share this with one person who works with children and tell them you will back them up if they ever need to report. I wish there were a way to end with a neat bow. There isn't. A boy died, and a courtroom spoke the only language it has, sentences and years. A judge cried, and a community saw that even the firmest roles have human hearts. The rest is up to us. The next time a door is locked the wrong way, the next time a house stops showing one child in its photographs, the next time a family story sounds rehearsed, we will not wait. We will knock. We will call. We will keep calling. And maybe, because of that, a child we will never meet will live the ordinary, beautiful life that 12 years old is supposed to start. For Gavin, and for every child whose name we never learned, we carry this forward. We notice. We act. We keep the light on.